We're going to talk about what some of the common hiring mistakes are going to be. We're going to talk about places to find great candidates and talk a little bit about interview questions and best practices. By a show of hands, how many of you have hired someone and you think that they're terrific and they come on board and they're not? I will tell you, if you could see me, I see hands going up all over the place. I'd raise my own hand if I could. And I say that to let you know that you are not alone. Unfortunately, if you Google training and interviewing, there's over 1 million hits within less than a minute on Google that will talk to you about how to give you YouTube videos to watch, things to questions, answers to the most common questions that are being asked. All of that is geared towards helping the candidate be successful. So as an interviewer, we really have to take a look at what are the best practices and think about how many of you have upcoming interviewers. Here are some tools and what to look for to prepare. So we recommend here at Omnia that you look at best practices and to take that interviewing process and break it down into percentages. So when you're looking to hire someone, you want to look at their education, work experience, skills. Do they have the necessary licenses that they need to be about 25% of that hiring process? 15% should be references. Another 5% should be background and drug tests. Now, for our participants who are calling in from Canada, I know that you can't do background and drug tests. So expand out. Take that 5% and divide it out into interview impressions into references so that you still get some of that information. Now at Omnia, we do recommend that you use a behavioral assessment to dig a little bit deeper underneath those questions, underneath that surface training that your candidate has to find out if they truly have the behavioral traits to be successful in that role. And then the last 30% of the interview process should be the interview impression. Speaking to someone and interviewing them face-to-face, over the phone, through Skype, via email is going to give you key insight that a resume isn't going to give you and that a behavioral assessment isn't going to give you. A resume can't tell you if someone's going to show up on time. A reference could, but in this day and age, a lot of times people will only verify the dates of employment. Now, I always recommend that you ask additional questions on the chance that you have someone who can give it to you. Don't assume that all they're going to say is, yes, we would rehire, no, we won't, and they were employed from this date to this date. But really key in on the interview impressions. And the mistakes that we're going to talk about today that prevent you from hiring smart is going to really tie into that interview process from start to finish. So before we begin about that, let's talk about cost of a bad hire. Now, there's lots of numbers floating around about what the cost of a bad hire can be, but the U.S. Department of Labor estimates that the average cost of a bad hire is about 30% of the hire's first-year earnings. 30%. That's a lot of money when you think about it, but you've got to add what we call the intangibles. You want to look at the lost worker productivity, add in the lost time that it's going to take you to recruit and train another new hire. Think about the intangible cost of recruiting and training expenses, negative impact on employee morale, and the negative impact on the customer service. And when you add all of that in, it's going to be about 1 to 1.5 times the annual salary of non-revenue generating employees. When you look at it, if you have someone who's generating revenue, a salesperson, a producer, it could jump to as many as 5 times the annual salary. Those numbers are staggering, from 30% to 1.5 times to 5 times the annual salary. And factor that in, and it's definitely going to affect the cost of an employee. And most times businesses only focus on, I've got them in, they're gone, now what? But it's so much more. And we are going to talk a little bit about how to interview, but we're going to talk about the mistakes that are found during that interview and hiring process. So if you had both of these people walk into your office, who would you hire? The picture on the person on the left or the person on the right? Go ahead and type in for me what you think you would. So I'm seeing an overwhelming response of right. Scott, to be determined. Love that. Let's dig a little bit deeper underneath it. Okay, so overwhelmingly, it's hiring to the right. Most people are going to come in and look at that. They're going to look at, oh, I like the person on the right. They must be the best person. Well, unfortunately, what happens is we hire the person on the right, and then we get the person on the left because they always put their best foot forward. So what we want to look at is, one, love for Melissa and Scott to say you can't tell by just looking at them, but you want to understand, do I get the person on the right and they come in and they don't do the job because they've learned to interview well? 15 minutes of fame, definitely, Carrie. And presentation is important, but it leads us right into that first hiring mistake. Hiring mistake number one is vague ideas. And what I mean by vague ideas is, do you really know who you're hiring for? What are you looking for? Are you looking for that person on the right, or are you looking for that person on the left? Are you looking for someone who can sell, or are you looking for someone who can service? Do you have a written job description? A lot of times we'll get calls that say, well, I'm looking for someone who may be able to do this. I want them to be able to sell, but, they're going to have to service their accounts. I want someone who has potential for growth, but who's going to stick with the company. The first mistake, and when you start to interview and when you start to hire, is one, know what you're looking for. Set those non-negotiable skills or traits that you need that candidate to have for that job. They have to be meticulous. They have to be process-oriented. They have to be detail-oriented. I need someone who's unafraid to pick up the phone and call someone. I want someone who can network, someone who's fast-paced, resilient, who has a license. Once you determine what the non-negotiable traits and behaviors and tasks that you're looking for, then you can think about your wish list. I wish I had someone who was bilingual. I wish I had someone who not only knows Word and Excel, but who understands PowerPoint. All of that is key to have that information and to understand it for both the interviewer and the candidate. Once you know what you're looking for, you can avoid hiring mistake number one and start thinking about hiring mistake number two, which is weak recruiting. So where do you find your talent? Do you look at it for customers? Think about posting it on your website. How many of you ask your employees, hey, do you know of someone who's looking for a position? I know for myself, I won't recommend someone for a position because that's my reputation on the line. Find your top performers and say, do you know of someone who's going to be good? Depending on what the position is, maybe it's the niche job sites through networking and job fairs. But don't discount resume and recruiting services as well. Job postings are expensive. Find a recruiter, find a resume service that can assist you. I know with Omnia we have a strategic partnership where we partner with a recruiter who searches job boards and can give up to 20 to 25 resumes for our clients who are looking for someone, but they don't want to pay the licensing fee to look at Career Builder and Monster and search through all of that information themselves. Don't discount looking for people. But if you're only recruiting for the candidates that are coming to you, you're going to have weak recruiting. Say you do place a position on Monster. Candidates can set up where their resumes are automatically generated based on keywords. So you may be interviewing for someone who's a sales producer with a very certain skill set, but get flooded with resumes from a job board because the word sales is in there. So I want to just ask quickly, where are some places that you successfully recruited new hires from? Go ahead and type in. Where have you found places? I know when I was working in retail, I would look in restaurants for servers who had great customer service skills if it was something that I was looking for. Teresa says she looks at Craigslist and Monster. Erica, great. Local high schools and colleges. That's terrific. Nancy says that they look on their own website and referrals. College-related classes, terrific. Definitely using their existing employee referrals. LinkedIn, social media is wonderful. Melissa looks at the big I, insurance websites for people posting their resumes. All of this is terrific. Understanding, Maryland has, there's a government free service for a job bank. Terrific. Understanding what you're looking for. Also, don't forget when we say niches, maybe you're looking for someone who has these skills. There are many different job sites that are available for veterans, soldiers who are coming back, who are re-entering the workforce, that are set up for that specific demographic with those skill sets. So least successful is local newspapers. Get a lot of people with no experience. Thanks for sharing that, Melissa, because we get that a lot. Newspapers seem to be going the way of the past when it comes to recruiting, because the cost is prohibitive unless you want one or two liners. Definitely you're getting a ton of people with no experience because you need someone, you have to limit your words count. And then nowadays, how many people truly are looking at the newspaper for jobs when there's so much different social media? You get LinkedIn, you get employee referrals, you have Twitter. Understanding that is key. And also looking at the position that you're hiring for. If you're hiring for a social media specialist or a marketing specialist, blast it out on social media. Look at Twitter, look at LinkedIn, because the people with the skill sets that you're looking for are going to be in that area. Great responses. Love how much your local your employees. Great source. So hiring mistake number 3, what I call is the being too easy. It works both ways. One, you want to think about, is your hiring process going to impress and attract those that have a choice? So when I say being too easy, it's not only from your aspect of come in, fill out the application, I'm going to hire you very quickly because the only testing that we give you is what I call the mirror test. Breathe on the mirror. Do I have breath? Okay, you're hired. But to recruit, retain, hire top talent, they want to know that your hiring process is going to take them and vet out those that may not be of the same caliber. And I know I hear it all the time. yeah, but I need somebody now. We have to fill that job. Or, yeah, I know a salesperson. When I see him, I've been doing this for years. Yeah, but I don't have time for all this interviewing. For that one, I always refer back to, okay, you don't have time to interview, but you have the money to waste at least 30% of their annual salary on a bad hire. For me, I'd rather devote the time to interview and talk to someone to get them on board. The other thing as well is when I talk about hiring process, most people who are looking for a job understand that it's going to take a while, especially someone who's been in the workforce and has the experience that you're looking for. You want to set those deadlines for them and let them know this is what's going to happen. This is typically how long our hiring process takes. And then keep the lines of communication. I hear several times, well, our process takes too long. And by the time we've decided, we can't, they've already gone somewhere else. Well, have they gone somewhere else because the process takes too long? Or have they gone somewhere else because the process hasn't been communicated? Remember, as much as you're interviewing the candidate, they're interviewing you as well. They want to know, is this a company that I want to be a part of? Hiring mistake number 4 is first impressions. First impressions, there's a big difference between being a good candidate and a star performer. And I always like to say that my first impression allows me to really get to know that person. For those of us who are intuitive decision makers, those first impressions in a split second, we can say, yes, I like them. No, I don't like them. But understand that top candidates, good candidates, are always going to be prepared. They're always going to be enthusiastic. They're going to make a great first impression, and they're really good at getting the job. As an interviewer, you want to dig deeper and talk to your top performers. And you want to find out, do they take that initiative? Are they competent? Are they hardworking? And are they good at doing the job versus getting the job? Now, a couple of quick questions for you. First question I have for you is, do you believe that the first impression is the candidate's best foot forward? True or false? And while you're answering those, go ahead and what are some things that a candidate does that makes a great first impression? So absolutely, first impressions is the candidate's best foot forward. And I will tell you right now that look at those intangibles or the tangibles. Some of the things I look for in the first impression is someone on time? If they aren't on time, and I personally have a non-negotiable, if that someone's more than 10 minutes late for an interview, whether or not I find out if it's an emergency, they'll get a little bit of grace for me. But if there's no phone call and they're more than 10 minutes late, I don't even interview them. Because their best foot forward is 10 minutes late. So if their best foot forward is 10 minutes late, I hire them. What's their dependability and punctuality going to look like in 90 days? And I take it a step forward because I'm wanting to tell them why I'm not interviewing them. And it may seem a little harsh, but the reason why I do that is that people may not understand, why is it not okay to be more than 10 minutes late? And I'll absolutely say thank you for coming in. However, you were 10 minutes late, and punctuality and dependability is a key part of what we're looking for this position. So I don't want to waste your time. Want to make sure that you and let you know that we're not going to proceed with that. Christine, you have a great question about how do you find out about a candidate's initiative and competence. And we're going to give you some of those questions at the end of the day, and also talk about what questions to ask in a little bit. Best one is to ask some behavioral questions. But What are some of the things that candidate does to make a great first impression? I love this, Mary. Asking appropriate questions. Smiling, eye contact, being prepared and knowing your company, absolutely. Common theme is being on time, being well dressed, sending a thank you note after the interview. Mary, before the interview, written communication. We're going to dive a little bit deeper in that because that can give you a red flag during the interview. Now, I will say about being enthusiastic and showing energy, Rich. Great. Also, but understand that people show energy very different. So if you have someone who's extremely outgoing, very enthusiastic, you may find that they are quickly answer questions, they may talk with their hands, they engage, whereas you may interview someone who is a bit quieter. And before they answer the question, they're going to think for a moment. Doesn't mean that one is better than the other one. Just understanding that everyone communicates a little bit differently, and you may have that very outgoing relational communicator, and you may have someone who's a bit more analytical. So they want to think through the best answer to give you before speaking. Understanding that and knowing those different communication styles is very key to really understanding what kind of energy that they show. Love bringing materials with them that they need. Dressed and groomed professionally. All of these are great. And if you see some of them are going over to the next question now, what are some of the things that the interviewer does to make a great first impression? Definitely on time, dressed for the environment, professional. Love that. Respectful of the candidate's time and effort invested in the interview and prep time for the interview. You have to be prepared. Remember, you're selling the company. If you show up as an interviewer and you show up late to the interview, you're telling that candidate you're not important. And you're also saying that if we hire you, you're not going to get a whole lot of my time. Being prepared, being friendly, absolutely. Teresa, I love that question. Ask what the employee is looking for an employer. Checking in, asking if they have any additional questions. Absolutely. All of those tie into what an interviewer can do for making a great first impression. Because with the interview impression, some of the questions that all of you are doing, did they arrive on time? Was the candidate prepared? Was the candidate engaged? And were you engaged? Some of the things that you have to look out for that are just become parts of our day is that turning off your email notifications, locking your computer screen so you're not distracted if things are coming up, putting your phone on D&D. All of that tells your future employee, your candidate, I'm focused on you. If you have multiple people interviewing, set that expectation at the very beginning, because by setting that expectation, they understand. Setting a time frame. We're going to talk for 15 or 20 minutes. Because without that preparation, it leads you directly into hiring mistake number 5, which is an unstructured interview process. Unstructured is inconsistent. It wastes time and energy, both yours and the candidates, and it isn't pre-planned. You're not prepared. Oh, I'm not quite sure what traits are most important for this position. Oh, I'm not quite sure what license you need. You don't have the license, but you're in the process. How does that affect it? Oh, I haven't looked over your resume. Creates a bad first impression of the company, and also leads you feeling a bit chaotic. Whereas if you have a structured interview process, you're going to include a pre-screening process, which is key. You're going to have pre-planned questions. And by having pre-planned questions, it doesn't mean that you're going to rapid fire interrogate the candidate, but it gives you a roadmap that allows you to take a detour if you need to. I'm going to ask this question. They said something that caught my attention. Let me follow that trail, and now I know where to go right back to. You want to use scoring guides. And with a structured interview process, it's definitely going to be more valid, reliable, and useful, both for you and for the candidate. Now, we get a lot of times why pre-screen. It goes back to hiring mistake number 2 of I don't have time for all of this. But pre-screening is very key, and it's actually going to save you time. A 7-minute pre-screen versus a 60-minute interview. It's going to allow you to eliminate applicants who don't meet the basic company standards. They can't work the hours required. Their salary ranges are above range. It helps you focus the in-person interview with specific items, and it helps determine top candidates to bring in for a face-to-face interview immediately. Some of the questions that you can ask is what interested you about our company? Why are you currently looking for a new position? Describe for me your ideal company and tell me about your worst manager. And what are your ranges for salary? Key. Now, great question, Rich. He asked about, is this a telephone pre-screen? Well, leads right into this next segue. I promise I did not coach him on this. Is that, one, pre-screenings can be completed via, what do you think? Phone, email, Skype, in person, all of the above? Next question is, phone interviews should only be done if the job requires phone skills. True or false? And then nothing of value can be learned through written correspondence. Agree or disagree? So looking at, absolutely, pre-screening can be completed via all of the above ways. In fact, we recommend that you pre-screen a variety of ways. Think about, once again, what does the job require? If it requires phone and email communication, I recommend that you send them an email. One of the things that we do here at Omnia when we are hiring is I'll send a quick email to set up a phone pre-screening. Dear Carrie, thank you for your interest in our client advisor position. Please let me know the best time for us to schedule a brief 7 to 10 minute phone conversation. And also please return your answer to this question, and I'll insert a quick question. What interests you about Omnia? Looking forward to talking to you. Thank you. Kim. When they respond, I can see what their written communication looks like. I've set up a time. I see their attention to detail. Did they answer the question? Did they answer it completely and fully? Great information. And sometimes pre-screenings can be completed in person. A lot of times that someone walks in, pre-screening doesn't necessarily have to be done by you. Maybe the pre-screening is done by the receptionist. You can get a lot of valid information. How did they treat that receptionist when they walked in? What are some of the, how did they look? What are some of the questions that they ask? Phone interviews, absolutely false. They should be done anytime that you are looking to hire a candidate. I don't know of any job that doesn't require some sort of phone skills. And it's key to understand, can they communicate? Listen to the background. Can they focus on you? Or do you hear them and you can tell that their attention is distracted? If you can tell their attention is distracted during a phone interview or pre-screening, once again, your clients are going to be able to do that. And love that everyone disagreed that nothing of value can be learned through written correspondence. Great information. One of my favorite client stories I have to share is that we had a client forwarded candidate's email that said, you said that I'm not going to be hired. Thank you for your time. But you said I wasn't detail oriented, and goes on to explain why they felt that they were detail oriented. And as we're reading it, there were at least 15 typos in one paragraph. 15. Now, in this day and age, there's spell check. And that gave us information that, okay, so you have to spell check It's clicking a button. Why could you not do that? But it definitely allowed us to talk to our client to say, well, here's perfect examples. Would you want this to go out to your clients? So when you phone screen, once again, you can tell a lot about a candidate. You want to make the phone call yourself. Always set 10 to 15 minutes. Ask general questions. You don't want to divulge too much information about your company, such as we're looking for a go-getter, someone who can sell. Candidates are going to pick up on that information and be driven to go that way. Also, if you use any type of skills testing or behavioral assessments, you want as natural a response as possible. So by asking these phone screens, getting this information from them, it's going to be key. While you have them on the phone, arrange a personal interview face-to-face if you're still interested. And go ahead and discuss salary requirements. The phone screen, the pre-screening, is set to eliminate candidates. If there is a key component of your hiring process that can get someone either the job or not the job, you want to hit on that very much. And Mark, absolutely, all this is provided at the end. You can download it along with some questions, some general questions that we have that are great for the phone screening. But don't be afraid to mention things 2 or 3 times. If they're required to work weekends, and you know that that seems to be a point that's very difficult to get people to stay, talk about it. Talk about it, rephrase the question, and then talk about it again if you bring them in for an in-person. And then after the phone screening, administering any profiles or pre-employment tests are key. You can set that expectation. We're going to send you a few more links I need you to take that will get you back information before that in-person interview. So once again, off-limit questions. I always like to throw this in. You want to make sure that you are in compliance, ADA and EEOC. Some of the questions you can't ask are you married? Are you divorced? If you're single, are you living with anyone? Do you have children? How old are you? Phone screenings can be a little bit deceptive sometimes because someone may sound much older or much younger than they are. But you have to ask. And yes, you would think that these are obvious questions, and they are to some extent, but people ask them. And legally, you can't. So understanding that, kind of basic, but it's always good for a refresher. What you want to ask is behavioral interview questions, both after you've gone through that general questioning, but really in person. And Christine, this goes back to the questions that you asked to find out about the candidate's initiative and competence. Most people ask hypothetical questions. Have you ever had an upset client? Yes. What would you do to resolve the conflict? It's hypothetical. With behavioral interview questions, it allows you to dig a little bit deeper. Describe a situation where you had an upset client and you had to resolve the issue. Tell me about a time where you weren't leading the project, but you saw some difficulties and you stepped in to help. Give me an example of a mistake that you made and how you corrected it. You want to look for who, what the problem was, how they resolved it, and what was the ending, what was the outcome. So describe it for me a recent time when you recognized an opportunity and acted on it. We'll talk about their initiative. Describe a problem person that you had to deal with at your last position. How did you handle them? That's going to give you insight into their conflict resolution. Did they take the initiative to go and talk to that person first, or did they come to the manager? By asking these behavioral interview questions, you're going to get a good indication of past performance. And past performance is a better indication of future performance than the resume is. Because let's face it, resume falls into the part of the first interview and first impressions. So I can make anything sound really good on a resume. I was 150% over my sales goal every month. That's a great number. What was their sales goal? Oh, I had to sell $100. Was that in line with what your company needs? So by asking these questions, you're going to get some information. And Melissa, thank you for backing us up. She was at an interview once where the employer asked if she was planning on having children and if she smoked. Nowhere is that okay to ask. And hopefully it was something that definitely in that interview process, bad first impression. Am I right, Melissa? So hiring mistake number 6 is bonding. Remember, you're looking for a key employee, not a buddy, not a best friend. Once again, remember, candidates are taught to look at something within the room and bond with you. They are trying to connect. They're going to flatter you. Also, remember that candidates tend to interview great because of experience, especially if they're actively looking. They've got it down pat. I know what to come in. I know what I can say. I've been trained. I've got a coach. I've looked at YouTube. I'm dressed the part. I can talk about it. Some of the worst interviewees, are going to be those candidates that have been at one position for a long time. Prior to coming to Omnia, I worked at the same company for 10 years. I felt like I probably bombed my interview. Thankfully, they hired me anyway. But 10 years, I knew what I was doing. I had a resume. Okay, I've got to update a resume. I don't even know what to put on it anymore because I was where I had been. So making sure that you're asking questions, looking at their experience. Also, you may have someone who is very factual. So they're just going to give you the facts. So you may feel like you're trying to pull information out from them, and that's okay. Just understanding that's who they are. Because remember, you aren't objective once you like them, and you aren't objective once you dislike them. You may not connect with everybody with the same communication style in that first 30 minutes of an interview, which is why you want to talk about this is what we're looking for. We're going to have multiple interviewers. We want to get 3 or 4 different people's impressions of you. And Melissa, you had a great question about, can we ask if a candidate smokes? You can't. What you can say is that we are a smoke-free building, just to set that expectation. But that goes back to bonding, because what would happen is if you ask a candidate, you know, we're wellness, do you smoke? Yes, I smoke. Oh, I'm not happy, now I'm not bonding with you. Your candidate's going to know that. So by keeping it very factual, keeping it with very specifics to the job, you're going to avoid that bonding. You're going to avoid that hire mistake number 1 and truly be able to make a decision based on who they are. And multiple interviewers are key, key. Hiring mistake number 7 is focusing too much on one aspect of the process. What we mean by that is, I got one reference, and it was bad. I'm not hiring them. We had the Omnia assessment said that they were a conditional recommendation. I'm not hiring them. I interviewed them, and they just didn't set right with me. I can't put my finger on it. I'm not hiring them. You've got to look at the interview process as a whole. Now, if you have red flags in that, you definitely want to dig deeper and explore it. But you can't make a decision based on strictly one aspect. Now, there is a caveat to that. If the aspect is that they have to be bonded and you can't hire because of a criminal record and they have that, you're going to have some of those hard skills. that may eliminate them from the position. They're required to have a certain license. They're required to have a driver's license to have the position. If they don't have the required licensing, once again, that's something that may eliminate them, but stated in the phone screen, stated in the pre-screening, you're required to have this, 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 and this. Well, I don't have it yet. I don't have my driver's license. Well, thank you for your time. I've learned that in 2 minutes versus 30 minutes later. Well, I love the candidate, and now I've got to let him go. So understanding that is key. Look at your interview process as a whole. Avoid those hiring mistakes, and you're going to really work very well at hiring smart. And definitely go back to energy with understanding that you may be a high energy, the candidate may be a low energy. Great point, Carrie, because there can be a disconnect. I'm extremely high energy if you haven't picked that up. Carrie is a little bit tamer versus she's handling the chat boxes for us. And more on the quiet end. If she were to interview me, she'd probably be like, wow, she's really a bit much. Thanks, Carrie. Very succinct and concise. For me, I might be like, could I get a little bit more out of her? But understanding that she's got the skills, understanding that what she has is perfect for her role versus webinars and things. So I'm going to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and type them in. As you're typing questions in, do want to let you know a couple of different little things. Resources that we have. So we do want to offer you a few resources. The candidate evaluation form is great for that initial recruiting process. It's going to allow you on a scale of 1 to 5, look through resumes, look through recruiting, look at degrees, phone screening. The Omnia interview questions that we have for you to download gives you those general questions, great for phone screening. You can pick and choose what you'd like. Also, we give you some of those interview competency questions. Those are those behavioral questions to dig a little bit deeper. The presentation as well, and then the selection companion, we recommend that you use that for if you have multiple interviewers so that you can compare and contrast results and perspectives. So going back to energy, great. Oh, Melissa's asked, I think the question can be deceptive. Sometimes you can be low energy at different times for different reasons, but that's generally not who you are. I know that happened to me because you were going through back surgery and back issues. Great point, Melissa. And we tell clients that a lot to look at that energy level. Red flag. So you can say, but you want to look at it to say, is it a red flag that they're going to hit the 3 o'clock slump and not recover until 9 a.m. the next day? Or is there something that's going through a time period? So when we talk about energy, we also want to look at how they respond. Typically, someone who is a more relational communicator is just going to jump right in and say, you ask a question, how are you doing today? I'm doing terrific. Or tell me about a time that you had an upset customer. Oh, well, I remember this one time when the client was upset because we wouldn't take this shirt back for him. And so then I had to call the manager, and the manager took forever. So I was talking to him. I helped him pick out a different shirt, and we just wound up exchanging it. So by the time the manager got there, everything was great. Whereas that same situation, tell me about a time you had an upset customer, someone who's a more analytical thinker is going to go, we had a moment where a customer was upset because we would not return a shirt. While waiting for the manager to come over, I showed her different options. We wound up exchanging the shirt for something else. For someone who has high energy, that pause would give them a second to say, why can't they just jump in? Different communication styles. Arlen asks, what's the applicant's recourse when asked a question that is not allowable? Absolutely. Great question. You can talk about, for me, I always say, you can say a couple of different things, and it depends on your initiative and you're willing to confront. Some people may just ask it and then walk away. Some people may say, I don't feel comfortable answering that question. I'm not sure how it pertains to our professional, to the job. 9 times out of 10 people will answer it, not that it should be answered, but when it comes to smoking, don't really see how that pertains to the job position, but we can move forward. Teresa asked, how flexible should the interviewer be when candidates agree to a phone screen interview time? Asked to push it back once the interview calls. Doesn't that give insight into someone's reliability? Absolutely. Look at your phone screenings, interview times as your first impressions. If you call in and you've set aside the time to call and the candidate says, oh, now isn't a good time, if it's not because of an emergency, I would mark them off the list and move on. Because once again, it tells them about insight into their reliability and their dependability. If you've set aside that time and been punctual to call in, they should set aside that time to be punctual and then respond. And once again, take into account there's always emergencies, but you have to just be careful. Lisa, great. Do you really want to work for someone to ask that question? And candidates have the right to end the interview as well. You know what? I just don't really feel like this is going to be a good fit. Thank you for your time. Don't want to waste any more. Do the 5 biggest mistakes in hiring apply to entry level to executive level? Absolutely. It applies across the board. In fact, sometimes even more to the bonding applies even more to the executive level than to entry level because the recruiting pool tends to be a little bit tighter. The biggest difference I see, as I said, would be the bonding to the executive level. And then typically phone screenings may not happen as much on the executive level unless it's through a recruiting company that's headhunting for you. Also, your recruiting for executive level is a little bit different than entry level. Executive level tends to be more of the, I'm going to talk to you and bring you over. Top talent on the executive level tends not to be actively listening as much. So you have to go out and find them versus them finding you. The resources are, if you click on the resources, you can just download them onto your computer. They're in the top right-hand corner for you. Also, we have a couple of links of a survey when you close out. There is a quick survey, only about 5 questions. Please let us know what you think, along with our upcoming interviewers. A few questions. Thoughts on when a candidate will not disclose their current salary. And of course, anyone can chime in if you want to. You know, current salary, when having a salary discussion, is always a bit of a negotiation on both ends. Typically, managers won't always speak up and say, well, these are the ranges, because if you can get someone a little bit less than top range, that's key. I would just talk in generalities about ranges, or you can ask them, what are you know, what's the least that you can take, or what's your bottom line, without really talking about hard and fact numbers, Mary. But you have to have some sort of ballpark. If they don't want to disclose their salary at all, you've talked about ranges, and they won't tell you whether they're within or without their range, then that's when you have to take a step back and say, okay, we've done everything we can to communicate and work with this candidate. They're not giving back. Do we really want to go on? Sarah, pictures with resumes, kind of a gray area. Some people place it on there, some people don't. Don't necessarily have to ask for a picture with a resume unless it's pertinent to the job itself. I know if it's a job where, for instance, modeling, acting, they ask for headshots to go along with the resume. and it's perfectly acceptable. If it's a call center and you're asking for a picture, probably not the best. So look at what the job is and then move forward from that. What I do as well is I look at social media. So great way for pre-screening is to see what's on their Facebook, their LinkedIn, and their Twitter. Are they representing themselves in a way that ties in with your company's branding? Best ways to address gaps in employment is to ask about it. So see, there's a little bit of a gap here between a 2-year gap. Can you explain why? A lot of times that's very open. You can't say, oh, I assume you took time off to be with your children, but you can definitely ask very directly, I see that there's some gaps in employment. Can you explain what those gaps are? The candidate's either going to address it, and if they offer information that you legally can't ask, then that's okay. But it is definitely something that you want to address. Now, I also look at what their history looks like. So sometimes you'll see, especially if someone's coming directly out of college, where they'll work June through August and then there's a gap, or you may see August through May and then there's a gap in the summertime. I tend to look at that as, okay, it's got an explanation. They either worked during school, if they left, went home, were off for the summer, and then came back, or they didn't work during the school year and worked during the summertime. So that resume gap is explainable. If it's something that there's a gap of 2 years, ask them. Just, what happened? Sarah asked, what's the best way to offer the candidate the job, phone, email, or in person? Depends on the position. I tend to call people on the phone to let them know. Typically, you're not going to make a decision when they're in front of you, and to ask someone to come in person is a little bit tougher. You do want to think of the offer as the welcome to your candidate. So as much as contact as you can is good. Now, you can always follow up as well to say, we'll be sending you an offer letter via email. We'll be sending you an offer letter via post, U.S. Postal Service, so that they have an idea of when it's coming, but I am a fan of at least on phone. If you have something that you know, okay, this is a great person, we're going to offer them right now, then you can do it. You just want to make it as personable as possible. And we have just a couple more moments, so if you're waiting for any other questions, definitely presenter information. If you have any calls for me, my telephone number and extension is there along with my email. Make sure that you download those resources. Check out our upcoming webinars. Anybody have any last-minute thoughts on the art of hiring smarter? Any other questions? I want to thank you once again for attending. We will be having some additional interviewing webinars in the future that will dig a little bit more into power interviewing, as well as checking out what we have coming up. I'm very excited that you joined us today and look forward to speaking with you soon. We'll leave the resources up for a little bit longer. The recording will be available in about a week.